Hello and thank you for joining us for this special edition of France in Focus. This one is all about French, the fifth language in the world. Coming up in the program, the French language thriving abroad. The number of speakers could more than double over the next few decades. English words keep creeping into everyday conversations, so I will be speaking to a guardian of the French language, Sir Michael Edwards. And learning French the easy way. If you're not the type to remember your grammar tables, we just might have a solution for you. First, we wanted to find out how many people speak French and where they live. And there's no better place to get that information than right here at the headquarters of the International Organization for la Francophonie. Now, of course, that's a word that doesn't even exist in English. It's a concept that was invented to defend and promote the French language around the world, wherever it might be spoken. The organization numbers 77 member states, and its next big summit takes place in Senegal this weekend. It turns out that the majority of French speakers in the world live in Africa, and that's a direct result of France's colonial past.
Do you speak French? Mais oui. More and more people around the world are learning the language of Molière. There are 274 million French speakers, and the French language is ranked 5th globally, spoken on all 5 continents. Just over 36% of Europeans speak French. America and the Caribbean boast 7%. The numbers dip a bit in the Middle East to around 1% and less than that in Asia and Oceania. But Africa more than makes up for it, with 55% of the population speaking French. It is one of the official working languages of the United Nations and one of 3 spoken at European Union meetings. But French is more than just words and grammar. There is the soul of the language, a concept explained by Algerian writer Kamal Daoud.
I'm Algerian, I'm a French speaker. The French language belongs to me because it's been there in my culture and my history, a violent history. I took the French language and incorporated it into my life in Algeria, and I felt its influence on my style. I write as an Algerian, but as a French-speaking Algerian.
For Daoud, the French language is like a vacant property left by France after Algeria's independence. A thought echoed throughout French-speaking Africa.
Even if you don't know a word of French, if you walk around the streets of Paris and eavesdrop on a casual conversation, you're probably going to recognize some words that you know. And it's not because your French is better than you thought, it's because English is everywhere. And yes, even the French think it brings a little je ne sais quoi to the conversation.
Le manager, le forcing, la deadline, it's just too much. To find out how many English words were used in Le Meeting at this all-French web agency, we did an experiment. On the left, a stopwatch. On the right, an English word counter.
Par rapport au site en iframe, le client voudrait pouvoir dupliquer les templates qu'on a sur la page. Est-ce que tu peux aller sur la page la deuxième? Mais il faut que ça puisse être user-friendly, tester tout ça et sur le front et sur le back.
18 English words in 2.5 minutes.
We can end up speaking only in English or franglais, and sometimes we ask ourselves, how did we do it before?
They work in the World Wide Web. No surprise then they've come across and picked up English words. But the language has also become a popular way to sell. On the high street, une veste is now a jacket.
English is everywhere, but there's no choice anymore.
It's a shame because French is such a beautiful language. It's a shame to anglicize it.
The biggest French oil group recently broadcast an entire advert in English, subtitled in French.
It's not a question of language.
This advertising consultant relies heavily on English words when coming up with slogans.
As well as being an effective way of communicating, English brings a certain dimension, stature, and importance to a brand.
By law, adverts have to have a French translation, but it's often relegated to a tiny font and hard to see. Jacques Toubon would cringe. 20 years ago, as Minister of Culture, he made French mandatory in official documents, contracts and adverts.
Imaginez que Imagine if someone was asked to sign a contract in English under the pretext that the company was American or Brazilian, and that person didn't speak or understood very little English. That would be denying them of their rights.
Le droit de cette personne.
What is good? We stay on celui-là.
The so-called Toubon law hasn't failed completely. The French branch of US firm GE Energy was fined for not translating all its documents into French, and last year 43 brands were forced to make their adverts more French. To stay within the law, let's end here in French.
Back in the 17th century, a small group of intellectuals started meeting regularly here in Paris. Their mission was to improve the French language. They became the guardians of French, and 3 centuries on, their work continues in this building right behind me, the Académie Française. The Academy has 40 members known as immortals, poets, novelists, philosophers, historians. Their command of French is unparalleled. They settle linguistic disputes, they define pronunciation, they set the rules of grammar and spelling. We have an appointment with one of these immortals, Sir Michael Edwards. Thank you very much for welcoming us into the sanctuary of the French language. First of all, is it okay for us to conduct this interview in English?
I imagine that Le Cardinal de Richelieu, who is looking at us from behind,
one of the founding fathers,
the founding father, may be a little bit shocked, but we must reassure him that we're here to speak about the French language and its glories.
Now, tell me something, and tell our viewers. There are 40 people in the world whose job it is to protect the French language. You're one of them, yet you're British. How does that make sense? There weren't enough good French speakers in France?
Let's not put it like that. I think that the Academy is interested in the fact that here is a British person who speaks the language that is everywhere and who could be writing in that language, but who is charmed, fascinated, overwhelmed by the French language. And it seems to me to make sense, actually, that someone from the outside loving the French language should be incorporated into a body whose purpose is, among other things, and essentially, to look after the French language. And I'm very happy to be in that position.
Every week, you and 39 other immortals meet here in this room. And what do you do exactly? You arbitrate disputes on the French language? What do you do?
We look at the words of the dictionary for that week, and we look at the definition that has been provided by the Service du Dictionnaire. We speak among ourselves and modify the definition as we think fit. The discussions are very interesting. I can say that because for the moment I'm not allowed to speak, given that I haven't been here long enough.
They don't let you speak in this room?
Not in this room.
Let me be controversial, and I am mindful that the Cardinal Richelieu is watching you as I ask you this. Do you prefer speaking English or French?
I don't prefer one or the other. What I like about speaking English is that I rediscover, because I don't speak a great deal of English at the moment, I rediscover that the fabulous beauty and power of the English language and its rhythms and its accents and so on, and its syntax, which is so complex in its own way. When I speak French, I delight in the fact that its construction is quite different. That you are immediately forced to analyse and to put everything together, and I love the sounds of French, which are entirely different from English. It's not just the certain nasal sounds and which are different as one thinks when one's at school. Every single sound of French is different from every single sound of English.
We're attending a typical French lesson except the students here are from all over the world, from Nigeria, from the US, from Brazil, from China, from Iraq. And that stands to reason, because French is the second most taught language in the world after English. We are at the Académie Française, a global network of schools that teaches French around the world, and they teach thousands of pupils every year. This is a fairly typical setting, but there are other ways to improve. Our partner radio station, RFI, broadcasts a news bulletin every day using nothing but simple vocabulary to help beginners along.
Merci d'écouter Radio France Internationale en direct de Paris, où il est 22 heures.
The latest news on Radio France International. But this bulletin is different.
Pour le journal en français facile. Bonsoir
For
Cécile.
15 years, the Journal en Français Facile, or Easy French, has covered the same news events as RFI's other bulletins. But here, the presenters avoid complicated words and speak slowly and clearly on air.
Bonsoir à tous.
2 hours earlier, presenter François Bernard met with his editor, Patrick Adam, to discuss what to cover. Then it's time to start writing.
Le texte du journal est disponible sur le site rfi.fr, donc on peut écouter et lire en même temps. Et ça, c'est très apprécié, je crois, par nos auditeurs.
For the man in charge of world news, it's an alternative for those who struggle to understand the French journalistic style.
Parfois, on parle un peu comme ça peut paraître un peu artificiel, mais à cette heure-là, ils peuvent avoir vraiment un rendez-vous où ils comprennent beaucoup mieux et, ce faisant, ils progressent dans leur compréhension de la langue française.
But what do the listeners think?
Ça permet de capter le message véhiculé par les journalistes.
Je vois la transcription pour mieux comprendre les mots qui sont plus difficiles dans la prononciation.
Je l'intègre, disons, dans mes cours pour que mes élèves puissent avoir accès justement à ce français facile de l'actualité et puissent écouter au moins tout ce qui se dit dans le monde francophone.
RFI also runs short stories in French on its foreign language stations and provides free grammar and vocab exercises online. The goal is to make learning French possible by listening to the radio wherever you are.
Le journal en français facile.
All right, thank you very much for joining us for this special edition of France in Focus. And remember, if you want to challenge yourself, you can watch the same show in French on our website, france24.com. See you next week. Until then, à bientôt.
Au revoir.